The observation deck of the Starship Meridian buzzed with quiet conversation as the mixed crew of alien species watched the viewport display. Commander Zethkar, a towering Vraxian with silver-scaled skin, gestured dismissively at the holographic readout showing a small blue planet. "Another primitive world," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had explored dozens of systems. The inhabitants barely achieved space flight 50 years ago. They call themselves humans. Dr. Yila, a graceful selenite with luminous purple skin, nodded in agreement. "Our preliminary scans show they're remarkably weak physically. No natural armor, claws, or enhanced senses. They're actually quite fragile." The assembled crew members from various starfaring civilizations murmured their agreement. The Carathians with their chitinous exoskeletons, the rock-skinned Grondites, and the energy-manipulating Nexari all found it hard to believe such soft creatures could pose any threat to anyone. Only one voice spoke against the consensus. Dr. Ember Thorne, the lone human aboard the ship, stood quietly near the back of the group. Her red hair caught the artificial light as she cleared her throat. "With respect, Commander, I think you might be underestimating my species," she said carefully. "There are things about humans that don't show up on standard biological scans." The room fell silent for a moment before several crew members began laughing. Chief Science Officer Kellorn, a tall being with translucent blue skin, shook his head in amusement. "Dr. Thorne, we appreciate your loyalty to your species, but the data is clear," he said condescendingly. "Humans have no natural weapons, limited physical strength, and relatively short lifespans. Your people only recently developed faster-than-light travel with our assistance." Ember felt her cheeks flush, but she kept her voice steady. "You're looking at the wrong metrics. Human strength isn't in our individual capabilities." "Then what could it possibly be?" asked Lieutenant Vexare, a serpentine Ophidian whose scales shimmered with each word. "Your people can't even survive in most planetary environments without artificial life support." Ember took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. She had served aboard the Meridian for 6 months as part of the Galactic Council's cultural exchange program. In that time, she had grown to respect her alien colleagues, but their dismissive attitude toward humanity troubled her deeply. "Humans adapt," she said simply. "We survive. When faced with impossible situations, we find ways to overcome them. It's not about individual strength or natural armor. It's about what we do when everything seems hopeless." Commander Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for polite disagreement among his species. "Adaptation is certainly valuable, Doctor, but it hardly makes humans formidable. Your home world has no large predators, no extreme environmental challenges that would forge a warrior species." Emberesh Ayutu returned. "Earth had no large predators? No environmental challenges?" She thought about the great white sharks, the polar bears, the storms that could level entire cities, the deserts that could kill in hours, and the mountains that claimed lives despite the best equipment and preparation. "Commander, I think there might be some gaps in your data about Earth," she began, but was interrupted by the ship's communication system. An urgent tone echoed through the observation deck, followed by Captain Mordunn's voice over the intercom. The Zentorian captain's normally calm demeanor carried a note of concern. "All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We have received a priority distress signal from a civilian transport in a nearby Kepler system." The conversation about human capabilities was quickly forgotten as the crew rushed to their stations. Ember followed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her colleagues' dismissive attitude toward her species would prove problematic someday. On the bridge, Captain Mordunn's forearms moved efficiently across multiple control panels. His scaled, reptilian features were tight with concentration as he briefed the arriving officers. The transport ship Harmony was carrying refugees from the Altair colonies to the safe zones in the Proximus system, he explained. They sent a coded distress signal 18 minutes ago. The message was brief but specific. The main view screen displayed the decoded transmission. The words sent a chill through every being on the bridge except one. "Mayday, mayday. This is Captain Yelnoth of the Transport Harmony. We are under attack by raiders believed to be affiliated with the Crimson Claw Syndicate. Our escort has been destroyed. We have over 3,000 civilian refugees aboard, including many younglings. The raiders are demanding surrender, but we know their reputation. They show no mercy to prisoners. The message ended with coordinates and a timestamp showing the transmission was already nearly 20 minutes old. Commander Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Crimson Claw Syndicate. They're some of the most ruthless pirates in this sector. Chief Security Officer Bractoes, a massive Grondite whose stone-like skin could deflect most energy weapons, rumbled his agreement. Their leader, Skarmaw, is a genetically enhanced Predathian. His species was bred for hunting and killing. No prey has ever escaped him. Dr. Yila consulted her console, her luminous features darkening with worry. The Crimson Claw doesn't take prisoners for ransom. They take them for their illegal fighting pits and slave markets. Captain Mordunn's expression was grim. Our current position puts us approximately 47 minutes away at maximum warp. Even if we leave immediately, there's little chance we'll arrive in time to help. What about other ships in the area? Asked Lieutenant Vexare, her serpentine form coiled with tension. The nearest patrol vessel is over 2 hours away, reported the communications officer. The closest military ship is a supply freighter with minimal weapons. As the bridge crew discussed their limited options, Ember found herself studying the tactical display more closely. Something about the coordinates seemed familiar. She pulled up her personal datapad and cross-referenced the location. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was looking at. "Captain," she said, stepping forward. "The raiders aren't just attacking a random transport. They've chosen that location specifically. It's a dead-end system with no inhabited planets and only one stable hyperspace exit route. They can take their time with the passengers without worrying about interference." The alien officers exchanged glances. It was an astute observation, but it only made their situation more desperate. "That confirms our worst fears," Captain Mordunn said heavily. "They have hours to do whatever they want with those refugees before any help can arrive." Ember felt a familiar sensation in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced during her years in Earth's emergency response services, the same feeling that had driven her to volunteer for the dangerous deep space assignment that had brought her to this ship. It was the feeling of being needed when the situation seemed hopeless. "Captain, request permission to speak freely," she said. Mordunn nodded, his 4 eyes focusing on her intently. "I know my colleagues believe humans are weak and primitive," Ember said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But there's something about my species that doesn't show up in your databases or biological scans. When everything seems impossible, when death appears certain, when there's no logical reason to keep fighting, that's exactly when humans become most dangerous." She paused, looking around the bridge at the faces of beings who had dismissed her people as harmless primitives. "If you can get me to that ship, I can help those refugees. Not because I'm physically stronger than the pirates, and not because I have better weapons, but because there's something in humans that your species might not understand. We don't know how to give up." The bridge fell silent as the alien crew processed her words. Commander Zethkar was the first to speak. "Dr. Thorne, with all due respect, you're a xenobiologist, not a combat specialist. The Crimson Claw Syndicate employs some of the most dangerous predators in known space. What could one unarmed human possibly do against them?" Ember met his gaze steadily. "Commander, you're about to find out." Captain Mordunn stared at the human xenobiologist for a long moment, his 4 eyes studying her intently. Around the bridge, the alien crew shifted uncomfortably. The suggestion that a single human could make a difference against the notorious Crimson Claw Syndicate seemed beyond foolish. It bordered on suicidal. "Dr. Thorne," the captain said slowly, "I appreciate your courage, but sending you alone against professional killers would be murder. The Crimson Claw employs Predathians, enhanced Carathian shock troops, and cybernetically modified assassins. These aren't ordinary criminals." Ember pulled up tactical data on her console, her fingers moving quickly across the interface. "Captain, look at their attack pattern. They're not acting like typical pirates." The main screen shifted to display the sensor data from the attack site. Ember highlighted several key points on the tactical readout. Most pirates would board quickly, take what they want, and leave. But the Crimson Claw has been sitting there for almost 30 minutes without moving to board the transport, she explained. They're savoring this. They want the refugees to be terrified before they board. Commander Zethkar leaned forward, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "What's your point, Doctor?" "They're overconfident," Ember said. "They've probably done this dozens of times before against civilian targets. They expect fear, panic, and surrender. They don't expect resistance, especially not from an unexpected source." Dr. Yila's luminous features flickered with concern. "Even if you're correct about their overconfidence, you're still talking about facing trained killers. Your species has no natural combat adaptations." Ember turned to face the Selenite doctor. "You're right. Humans don't have claws, or armor, or enhanced strength. But we have something else. We can think clearly when everyone else is panicking. And we can convince others to fight when they've already given up." Lieutenant Vexar coiled more tightly, her serpentine form betraying her agitation. "Those refugees are civilians from multiple species. They won't fight trained pirates, especially not for a human they've never met. They'll fight for their children," Ember said quietly. "Every species protects their young. They just need someone to show them how." Chief Security Officer Bractois rumbled his disagreement. "The Crimson Claw has been operating for decades. Their leader, Skarmaw, has never lost a single engagement. His reputation alone is enough to freeze most beings with terror." Ember felt something cold settle in her stomach, but her voice remained steady. "Then, it's time someone showed him what happens when predators meet humans." The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of ship systems. Captain Mordun studied the tactical display, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Even if I agreed to this plan, which I haven't, how exactly do you propose we get you aboard a ship that's under siege by professional pirates?" Ember had been thinking about that exact problem since the distress call arrived. The Meridian has emergency medical pods designed for rescue operations in hostile environments. They're small, fast, and have minimal sensor signatures. One of them could reach the transport ship without being detected. "And then what?" asked Dr. Yila. "You beam aboard a ship full of terrified refugees and somehow convince them to fight trained killers." "Not fight them," Ember corrected. "Survive them. There's a difference." She pulled up the transport ship schematics on the main screen. Her xenobiology training had required her to study the layouts of major civilian vessels for emergency medical responses. The Harmony is a standard Altarian refugee transport. It has multiple compartmentalized sections, emergency blast doors, and redundant life support systems. It was designed to keep people alive in crisis situations. Commander Zethkar studied the ship's layout with growing interest. "You're suggesting a defensive strategy rather than direct confrontation." "Exactly. Pirates expect quick surrender or easy victory. They don't expect a long, drawn-out siege where their advantages start to disappear." Ember highlighted various sections of the ship's design. These compartments can be sealed and defended. The environmental systems can be rerouted. The emergency protocols can be activated to create choke points and safe zones. "But the refugees would still be trapped," pointed out Lieutenant Vexare. "Only until help arrives," Ember said, looking directly at Captain Mordun. "The Meridian might be 47 minutes away now, but every minute the pirates waste trying to break through organized resistance is a minute closer to rescue." Dr. Yila's features brightened with understanding. "You're trying to change the equation. Instead of a quick slaughter, you want to turn it into a prolonged siege." "Exactly. And pirates hate sieges. They're expensive, dangerous, and attract unwanted attention from patrol ships." Chief Security Officer Bractus leaned back in his chair, his stone-like features showing grudging respect. "It's not completely insane, but it would require someone with extensive knowledge of ship systems and crisis management. I've spent 6 years working emergency response on colony worlds, Ember said. Natural disasters, system failures, and hostile wildlife encounters. I've coordinated evacuation procedures for thousands of people under extreme conditions. Captain Mordun was quiet for several minutes, his 4 arms moving across different control surfaces as he ran calculations and probabilities. Finally, he looked up. Dr. Thorne, I want you to understand something clearly. If I authorize this mission, you will almost certainly die. The Crimson Claw doesn't leave witnesses alive. Even if you succeed in organizing some resistance, you'll be their primary target once they realize what's happening. Ember met his gaze without flinching. Captain, those refugees include children who will be sold into slavery if we don't act. Some things are worth dying for. And if you fail, ask Commander Zethkar. If your presence only makes things worse for the refugees, then at least they'll die knowing someone tried to help them, Ember said simply. But I don't plan to fail. The bridge crew exchanged glances, and Ember could see doubt and concern on every alien face. They were calculating odds, considering variables, and reaching logical conclusions about the likelihood of success. But humans, Ember realized, had never been particularly logical when it came to protecting the innocent. Captain Mordun stood up from his command chair, his decision made. Dr. Thorne, report to the medical bay immediately. Dr. Yila, prepare an emergency medical pod for covert insertion. Commander Zethkar, plot a course that brings us as close as possible to the target system without alerting the pirates. Captain, said Lieutenant Vexar, are you certain about this? No, Mordun replied honestly. But Dr. Thorne is right about one thing. We can't just abandon 3,000 innocent beings to the Crimson Claw without trying something. As the bridge erupted into organized activity, Ember felt the familiar mix of fear and determination that had driven her through every crisis she had ever faced. Her alien colleagues still didn't understand what made humans dangerous, but they were about to learn. The medical bay was a testament to Galactic Council engineering, sterile, efficient, and designed to treat dozens of different alien physiologies. Dr. Yila worked quickly to prepare the emergency medical pod, while Ember gathered the supplies she would need. These pods are designed for medical extraction, not infiltration, Dr. Yila warned as she ran diagnostic checks. The life support will last approximately 4 hours, and the communication system has limited range. 4 hours should be enough, Ember said, checking the small toolkit she was assembling. Either we'll have established defensive positions by then, or you'll be dead, Dr. Yila finished bluntly. Dr. Thorne, I must ask, is this really about helping the refugees, or is this about proving something about human capabilities? Ember paused in her preparations, considering the question honestly. Both, I suppose, but mostly it's about doing what's right. The Selenite doctor's luminous features flickered with something that might have been admiration. Your species continues to surprise us. That's what I'm counting on, Ember replied. 20 minutes later, the medical pod launched from the Meridian S Auxiliary Bay. It was a small, egg-shaped craft designed for rapid deployment in emergency situations. As it streaked through space toward the besieged transport ship, Ember ran through her mental checklist one more time. The pod sensors showed the Crimson Claw vessels maintaining their positions around the Harmony. 3 sleek raider ships formed a triangular formation, their weapons trained on the civilian transport. It was a classic intimidation pattern designed to break the will of any would-be resistors. But as Ember watched the tactical display, she noticed something the pirates probably hadn't considered. Their formation was perfect for containing a helpless target, but it also meant they were committed to their positions. Any significant change in the situation would require time to adjust their strategy, time that organized defenders could use to their advantage. The communication system crackled to life with a transmission from the lead raider ship. The voice that emerged was exactly what Ember had expected from the notorious Scarmaw, deep, predatory, and absolutely confident. Transport Vessel Harmony. This is Commander Scarmaw of the Crimson Claw. You have exactly 10 minutes to open your airlocks and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the immediate execution of all younglings aboard your vessel. The threat sent ice through Ember's veins, but it also confirmed her tactical assessment. The pirates were still following their standard intimidation playbook. They expected terror and surrender, not organized resistance. Her pod was now less than 5 minutes from the transport ship. Soon, the galaxy's most feared pirates would discover what happened when human determination met impossible odds. And Ember suspected they weren't going to like the lesson. The emergency pod stealth systems engaged as it approached the transport ship's emergency docking port. Ember watched the proximity sensors carefully, timing her approach to coincide with the Harmony S sensor sweep pattern. The civilian transport was rotating slowly, probably trying to keep their strongest shields between themselves and the pirate vessels. Through the pod's viewport, she could see the massive bulk of the refugee transport. The Harmony was nearly a kilometer long, designed to carry thousands of passengers in relative comfort during long-distance voyages. Now it hung in space like a wounded whale, surrounded by 3 predatory sharks. The pirate ships were smaller, but clearly built for violence. Their hulls bristled with weapons, and their sleek profiles spoke of speed and aggressiveness. The lead vessel bore the distinctive red claw markings of the Syndicate's flagship. Ember's pod made contact with the emergency airlock with barely a whisper of sound. The automated systems recognized a legitimate medical emergency pod and began the docking sequence. Within moments, she was cycling through the airlock and stepping aboard the transport ship. The corridors of the Harmony were packed with frightened refugees, beings from dozens of different species huddled together in family groups, their faces showing the universal expression of terror. Children cried while their parents tried to offer comfort they didn't feel themselves. An Altarian crew member spotted Ember emerging from the airlock and rushed toward her. His blue-scaled features were tight with panic. "Are you part of a rescue team?" he asked desperately. "Please tell me there are warships coming." "Help is coming, but not soon enough," Ember said honestly. "I'm Dr. Ember Thorn from the Galactic Council ship Meridian. I'm here to organize resistance until rescue arrives." The crew member's face fell. "Resistance? Against the Crimson Claw? They'll kill everyone aboard if we resist." "They're going to kill everyone anyway," Ember said bluntly. "That's what the Crimson Claw does. But we can make it expensive for them." She looked around at the terrified refugees filling the corridor. Families clutched each other desperately, while the elderly tried to comfort the young. It was exactly the kind of scene that should have made her own fear overwhelming. Instead, Ember felt the familiar calm that had always come over her during emergencies. Her mind began cataloging resources, escape routes, and defensive positions. "What's your name?" she asked the crew member. "Engineer Cole Tar," he replied. "I'm responsible for the environmental systems." "Perfect. I need you to take me to Captain Yelnoth immediately. Then, we need to gather all the crew members who know the ship's systems." As they moved through the corridors, Ember noticed something that gave her hope. Despite their fear, the refugees were staying organized. Families remained together, and no one was panicking to the point of chaos. These people had survived the destruction of their colonies. They were tougher than they looked. Captain Yelnoth was a middle-aged Centaurian whose normally calm demeanor had cracked under the pressure. When Ember introduced herself, his 4 arms gestured helplessly at the tactical display, showing the pirate ships. "Dr. Thorne, I appreciate the Galactic Council's concern, but there's nothing we can do against 3 fully armed raider vessels," he said. "I've been delaying as long as possible, but Skarmaw is growing impatient." "Captain, I need you to listen carefully," Ember said, her voice carrying the authority she had developed during years of crisis management. "The pirates expect you to surrender or die quickly. But this ship has defenses they don't know about, the refugees themselves." She pulled up the ship schematics on the bridge's main display. "How many crew members do you have who know the ship's systems?" 47, Captain Yelnoth replied. "But they're not trained for combat. They don't need to be. They need to be engineers, medics, and coordinators." Ember highlighted several sections of the ship. These compartments can be sealed independently. The emergency blast doors can create choke points. The environmental systems can be rerouted to create safe zones. The captain's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You want to turn the ship into a fortress. Exactly. Pirates are used to quick raids. They board, terrorize the passengers, take what they want, and leave. They're not equipped for a prolonged siege against organized offenders. Engineer Coulthard leaned forward. The ship's internal sensor grid could track their movement once they board. We could seal sections behind them, trap them in specific areas. That's the idea, Ember confirmed. But it requires coordination and courage from everyone aboard. Captain Yelnoth was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need? First, I need to address the passengers. They need to understand that running and hiding won't save them. But organized resistance might. 20 minutes later, Ember stood in the ship's main assembly hall facing over 3,000 frightened refugees. The crowd included representatives of dozens of species, Centaurians, Selenites, Altarians, Carathians, and many others. Parents held their children close while the elderly sat quietly, their faces showing resigned acceptance of their fate. My name is Dr. Ember Thorne, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's communication system. I'm a human, and I'm here to help you survive. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several beings called out questions about rescue ships and military intervention. There are no warships coming in time to save you, Ember said bluntly. The nearest help is at least 30 minutes away. But that doesn't mean you're helpless. She gestured to the ship around them. This vessel was designed to keep you alive in the most dangerous environments in space. It has multiple compartmentalized sections, redundant life support systems, and emergency protocols specifically designed for crisis situations. A Carathian elder raised one of his chitinous arms. Dr. Thorne, we are civilians. We have no weapons, no military training. How can we fight the Crimson Claw? You don't fight them, Ember replied. You survive them. There's a difference. She moved to the center of the hall, where everyone could see her clearly. Pirates expect fear. They expect panic. They expect you to make their job easy by running around helplessly while they hunt you down one by one. The hall was completely silent now, every being focused on her words. But what if instead of scattered, terrified prey, they found organized groups working together? What if every corridor they entered was a potential trap? What if every section they tried to clear was defended by people who knew the ship better than they did? A young Selenite female stood up. But they have weapons. They have armor and combat training. Yes, they do, Ember acknowledged. But they also have something that will work against them, overconfidence. The Crimson Claw has been doing this for years against helpless civilians. They don't expect resistance. They don't expect to have to work for their victory. She pulled up a simplified schematic of the ship on the hall's display screens. Every minute we make them waste is a minute closer to rescue. Every section we force them to fight for is resources they can't use elsewhere. Every time we make them choose between speed and safety, we're winning. Captain Yelnoth stepped forward to address the crowd. Dr. Thorne is right about one thing. Surrender won't save us. The Crimson Claw doesn't take prisoners for ransom. They take them for slave markets and fighting pits. The reality of their situation began to settle over the crowd. Parents pulled their children closer, but Ember could see something else starting to appear in their faces, determination. What exactly are you asking us to do? Called out a Grondite, male whose stone-like skin was scarred from years of hard labor. I'm asking you to split into groups based on your skills and knowledge, Ember replied. Engineers and technical specialists will control the ship's systems, sealing sections, rerouting power, managing environmental controls. Medical personnel will establish aid stations in secure areas. Parents with young children will move to the most protected sections of the ship. She paused, making eye contact with as many beings as possible. And I'm asking everyone else to help delay the pirates in any way possible. Not to fight them directly, but to make every step they take costly and time-consuming. The crowd was stirring now, conversations breaking out between families and groups. Ember could see the change beginning, the shift from helpless victims to potential survivors. Dr. Thorne, called out an elderly Zentorian. "What happens when the pirates realize we're not surrendering quietly? Then, they'll discover something about humans that most species don't understand," Ember replied. "We don't know how to give up. And sometimes that's contagious." The lights suddenly dimmed, and the ship's communication system crackled to life. Skarmaw's predatory voice filled the assembly hall, sending chills through every being present. "Transport Harmony, your time is up. Prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in the immediate execution of all younglings aboard your vessel. You have been warned." The hall erupted in fearful cries and desperate conversations. Parents clutched their children while the elderly closed their eyes in resignation. But Ember stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "That threat just proves something important," she announced loudly. "He's trying to scare you into giving up without a fight. That means he's worried about casualties among his own crew." The hall gradually quieted as beings focused on her words. A confident predator doesn't threaten his prey. He just attacks. Skarmaw is trying to break your will before he even boards because he knows that organized resistance will cost him time and personnel he doesn't want to lose. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, seeing fear but also the first hints of defiance. "So let's give him exactly what he's trying to avoid. Let's make him work for every meter of this ship." As if summoned by her words, the ship's sensors detected incoming boarding craft. 3 sleek assault shuttles had detached from the pirate vessels and were moving toward the Harmony's main airlocks. "This is it," Ember announced. "Everyone to your assigned positions. Remember, we don't have to win this fight. We just have to survive it long enough for help to arrive." As the refugees began moving to their designated areas with surprising organization and purpose, Ember felt a familiar mixture of terror and determination. In 30 years of emergency response work, she had never faced anything quite like this. But as she watched families supporting each other and strangers working together to protect their children, she realized something important. The galaxy's most feared pirates were about to discover what happened when human stubbornness met the universal instinct to protect the innocent. And she suspected it would be a lesson none of them would ever forget. The boarding craft struck the Harmony's airlocks with mechanical precision. Through the ship's internal sensors, Ember watched 3 teams of heavily armed pirates begin their assault. Each team consisted of 6 beings, a mixture of enhanced Carathians, cybernetically modified assassins, and 1 massive Predathian leading each group. Boarding detected at airlocks 7, 12, and 15, reported engineer Koltar for his position at the environmental controls. Emergency blast doors are sealed. All civilian populations have moved to secure sections. Ember stood in the ship's auxiliary command center, surrounded by monitors showing the pirates' progress through the outer corridors. The families are staying calm, and the technical crews are following your defensive protocols exactly. Through the monitor, Ember watched the lead Predathian, undoubtedly one of Skarmaw's lieutenants, gesture angrily at the sealed blast door blocking his team's advance. These pirates were used to terrified civilians fleeing in panic, not organized defensive positions. "Koltar, can you reroute environmental controls to the sections they're in?" she asked. The Altarian engineer's hands moved quickly over his controls. "I can adjust lighting, temperature, and atmosphere composition within safety limits." "What did you have in mind?" "Make them uncomfortable. Not dangerous, but annoying. Dimmer lighting to strain their vision. Slightly higher temperature to make their armor less comfortable. Anything that makes their job harder." "Implementing now," Koltar confirmed. On the monitors, Ember could see the immediate effects. The pirates' movements became more cautious as the lighting dimmed. Several of them adjusted their equipment to compensate for the environmental changes. More importantly, they were starting to look frustrated rather than confident. "This is taking too long," growled one of the Carathian raiders, his voice picked up by the ship's audio sensors. "We should have cleared 3 sections by now." "Stay focused," snapped the Predathian team leader. "These blast doors won't hold us forever." But as the minutes passed, Ember could see doubt beginning to creep into their movements. Pirates were used to quick, decisive actions. Extended operations meant increased risk and decreased profit margins. The communication system suddenly crackled with an incoming transmission from the flagship. Skarmaw's voice carried barely controlled anger. Alpha Team, report. Why haven't you secured the passenger sections yet? Unexpected resistance. Commander, came the reply from the Predathian team leader. The civilians have sealed themselves into defensive positions. We're having to cut through multiple blast doors. There was a long pause before Skarmaw responded, and when he did, his voice carried a dangerous edge. Are you telling me that a ship full of refugees is causing problems for my best boarding teams? Not problems, sir. Delays. We'll have the ship secured within the hour. You have 30 minutes, Skarmaw snarled. After that, I'm sending in the heavy assault units, and they won't be as careful about keeping prisoners alive. The transmission cut off, leaving an uncomfortable silence on the bridge. Dr. Thorne, Captain Yelnoth called. They're bringing in more forces. How long until the Meridian arrives? Ember checked her chronometer. 23 minutes. We need to hold them off for 23 more minutes. As if responding to the increased pressure, the pirates began using more aggressive methods. Explosive charges replaced cutting tools, and the sound of detonations echoed through the ship's corridors. They're through the first blast door, reported Koltar, moving towards Section 12, where we have 47 refugees sheltered. Ember's mind raced through the ship's layout. Section 12 was one of their prepared fallback positions, but it wouldn't hold against concentrated assault. Evacuate Section 12 to the secondary shelter areas, she ordered. Seal the connecting corridors behind them. Make the pirates think they're winning while we control their movement. The next several minutes were a carefully choreographed retreat. Refugee families moved through predetermined routes, while technical crews sealed passages behind them. The pirates found themselves advancing through empty sections toward objectives that were no longer there. But the strategy couldn't work indefinitely. Dr. Thorne, came an urgent call from one of the volunteer coordinators. The pirates have split their forces. 2 teams are pushing toward the main refugee shelters while the third is heading for the bridge. Ember studied the tactical display, watching the 3 groups of raiders advancing through different sections of the ship. The pirates were adapting to the defensive strategy faster than she had hoped. They're trying to force us to choose, she realized. Defend the civilians or protect the ship's command systems. Captain Yelnoth's voice carried over the communication system. Dr. Thorne, I can seal the bridge and maintain control from here, but those families... No, Ember said firmly. The bridge is too important. If they take control of the ship's systems, they can override all our defensive measures. She studied the monitor showing the pirate team approaching the main refugee shelter. 63 beings were protected there, including 22 children. The blast doors would delay the pirates, but not stop them. Koltar, can you reroute the ship's internal transport system? The engineer looked confused. The cargo lifts and maintenance shafts? Yes, but they're not designed for passenger use during combat conditions. Not for passengers, Ember said, a plan forming in her mind. For me, Captain Yelnoth's voice carried alarm. Dr. Thorne, what are you planning? Something that pirates don't expect from civilians, she replied, moving toward the maintenance access panel. A direct confrontation. As she prepared to enter the ship's transport system, Ember reflected on the conversations she had endured about human capabilities. Her alien colleagues had been correct about human physical limitations. She was smaller, weaker, and less naturally armed than any of the pirates she was about to face. But they had missed something crucial about her species. Humans didn't win fights because they were stronger. They won because they were willing to take risks that seemed impossible to more logical species. The maintenance shaft was cramped and dark, designed for automated systems rather than human movement. But it provided access to areas of the ship that the pirates wouldn't be monitoring. Dr. Thorne, Koltar's voice came through her personal communicator. The pirate team is 2 minutes away from the refugee shelter. The blast door won't hold them long. Understood, Ember replied, pulling herself through the narrow passage. Prepare to activate emergency fire suppression in Section 15 on my signal." She emerged from the maintenance shaft directly behind the pirate team that was advancing on the refugee shelter. 3 beings in heavy armor were setting explosive charges on the blast door while their companions provided security. For a moment, Ember remained perfectly still, studying her opponents. The Predathian team leader was larger and more heavily armed than anything she had ever faced. His companions carried weapons that could cut through ship hulls. In a direct fight, she would die in seconds. But humans, she realized, had never been particularly interested in fighting fair. "Coal tar," she whispered into her communicator. "Activate fire suppression." Full flood. The corridor erupted in clouds of harmless but blinding suppression foam. The pirates cursed and stumbled as their visibility dropped to 0. In the confusion, Ember moved quickly to the control panel for the blast door. Her fingers flew over the interface, not trying to reinforce the door, but to override its safety protocols. "What's happening out there?" demanded the Predathian leader, his voice muffled by the suppression foam. "Environmental malfunction," one of his team members replied. "Some kind of automatic fire response." As the foam began to clear, Ember completed her work on the control panel. The blast door remained sealed, but now it was connected to the ship's emergency hull breach protocols. "Coal tar," she whispered. "When I give the signal, vent atmosphere from Section 15 for exactly 3 seconds. No more." The pirates were beginning to regain their bearings when Ember triggered the hull breach simulation. The blast door suddenly registered a massive atmospheric pressure differential. The emergency systems responded exactly as designed. Magnetic clamps engaged to prevent any opening of the door, while emergency barriers deployed to contain what the ship's sensors believed was a catastrophic hull breach. "What's going on?" snarled the Predathian leader as his team found themselves effectively trapped by safety systems they couldn't override without extensive technical knowledge. "Sir," reported one of the Carathian team members, "the ship's computer is reading a hull breach in this section. It won't let us open any blast doors or airlocks." Through her communicator, Ember could hear confusion and anger in the pirate leader's voice. "That's impossible. We didn't breach the hull." "Tell that to the ship's computer," his subordinate replied. Ember smiled grimly as she moved back toward the maintenance shaft. The pirates were trapped by their own success. The ship's safety systems, designed to protect passengers during real emergencies, were now protecting those same passengers from a very different kind of threat. "Dr. Thorne," Captain Yelnoth's voice crackled through her communicator. "Brilliant work. But the other 2 teams are still advancing." "I know," Ember replied, pulling herself back through the narrow passage. "But they just learned something important about fighting humans." "What's that?" "We don't just adapt to survive impossible situations," she said, making her way toward the next pirate team. "We turn impossible situations into weapons." On the bridge of the Crimson Claw flagship, Scarmaw stared at the tactical display with growing disbelief. His 3 elite boarding teams had been on the transport ship for almost 40 minutes, and they had yet to secure a single group of refugees. "Commander," reported his communications officer, "Alpha Team is reporting system malfunctions that have them trapped in Section 15. Beta Team is advancing, but encountering unexpected technical difficulties. Gamma Team is requesting additional cutting equipment." Scarmaw's predatory features twisted with rage. "System malfunctions? Technical difficulties? These are civilians." "Yes, sir," the officer replied carefully. "Then why," Scarmaw roared, "are they giving my best teams more trouble than a military convoy?" Before anyone could answer, an urgent alert sounded on the bridge. The sensor operator's voice carried alarm. "Commander, we have incoming ships. 3 vessels on intercept course. Estimated arrival in 18 minutes. Scarmaw studied the sensor readout with growing concern. The approaching ships bore Galactic Council markings, and their energy signatures suggested military-grade weapons and shields. "Sir," asked his first officer, "should we abort the boarding operation?" Scarmaw considered the question carefully. 18 minutes should be more than enough time for his teams to finish their work and return to the ships. The problem was that his teams didn't seem to be making the kind of progress he expected. Negative, he decided. Signal all teams to accelerate their operations and prepare the heavy assault units for immediate deployment. As his crew rushed to carry out his orders, Skarmov found himself wondering about something that had never occurred to him before. In all his years of raiding civilian targets, he had never encountered resistance like this. The beings on the transport ship weren't fighting his teams directly. They were outthinking them. And, somewhere in the back of his mind, a disturbing thought was beginning to form. If these refugees could cause this much trouble for his elite boarding teams, what would happen when the approaching warships arrived? For the first time in his career, the galaxy's most feared pirate was beginning to wonder if he had made a serious mistake. Skarmaw materialized on the transport ship's deck in a burst of crimson light, his personal teleportation device allowing him to bypass the defensive measures that had stymied his boarding teams. The notorious pirate leader was exactly as terrifying as his reputation suggested. Nearly 3 meters tall, with enhanced Predathian features that spoke of genetic modification and cybernetic augmentation. His arrival sent shock waves through the ship's communication system as his trap teams reported their commander's presence. "Skarmaw is aboard," Captain Yelnath announced through the ship-wide intercom, his voice tight with concern. "All civilians to the innermost shelters immediately." Ember was making her way through the maintenance shafts toward the third pirate team when the announcement reached her. Through the ship's sensors, she could track the infamous pirate's movement through the corridors. Unlike his subordinates, Skarmaw wasn't being slowed by blast doors or environmental controls. He was cutting through them with what appeared to be personal-grade military weapons. "Dr. Thorne," Koltar's voice crackled through her communicator. "He's heading directly for the main refugee shelter. Our defensive measures aren't stopping him." Ember pulled up the ship schematics on her personal display, tracking both Skarmaw's position and the location of the largest group of refugees. The pirate leader was moving with purpose and speed, ignoring the smaller groups of trapped refugees in favor of the main prize. "How long until the Meridian arrives?" she asked. 14 minutes, came Captain Yelnath's reply. "But at his current rate of progress, Skarmaw will reach the main shelter in less than 4. Ember studied the tactical situation carefully. The pirate leader was bypassing all the defensive measures that had worked against his subordinates. He had better equipment, superior training, and decades of experience in exactly this kind of assault. In a direct confrontation, he would kill her and everyone she was trying to protect. But as Ember watched his progress through the ship's corridors, she noticed something interesting. Skarmaw was moving alone, having left his boarding teams to deal with their own problems. He was confident, focused, and completely certain of his superiority, which meant he was making the same mistake every predator made when hunting what they believed to be helpless prey. He was thinking like a predator instead of thinking like his target. "Koltar," she said, changing direction in the maintenance shaft, "I need you to do something that's going to sound crazy." "Dr. Thorne, please tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning. I need you to route all ship communications through the main corridor speakers. And I need you to give me access to Skarmaw's personal communication frequency." There was a long pause before the engineer responded. "Dr. Thorne, direct communication with Skarmaw is inadvisable. His reputation for cruelty is well documented." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," Ember replied, positioning herself in a maintenance junction that would give her access to the corridor Skarmaw was approaching. "Patch me through in 30 seconds. As she waited, Ember reflected on everything her alien colleagues had said about human limitations. They were right about human physical capabilities, right about human technology, and right about human military inexperience compared to species that had been fighting galactic wars for millennia. But they had missed the most important human characteristic of all, the ability to turn weaknesses into weapons. "You're connected," Koltar announced. Ember took a deep breath and activated the communication system. Her voice echoed through the ship's corridors as she spoke directly to the most feared pirate in the galaxy. "Skarmaw," she said calmly. "This is Dr. Ember Thorne of the Galactic Council vessel Meridian. I'm the one who's been organizing the resistance aboard this ship." The pirate leader stopped moving, his massive form visible on the corridor sensors as he listened to her words. A human, he said finally, his voice carrying amusement and contempt in equal measure. I should have known. Your species has a reputation for interfering in situations beyond your comprehension. You're absolutely right, Ember agreed. Humans are weak, poorly armed, and completely outclassed by professional killers like yourself. That's why I wanted to make you an offer. Skarmaw's laughter echoed through the corridors. An offer? You're in no position to negotiate, little human. Actually, I am, Ember replied. You see, while your teams have been struggling with blast doors and environmental systems, I've been studying your operation. And I've noticed something interesting. She paused, letting the silence stretch. You're running out of time, she continued. Galactic Council warships arrive in 13 minutes. Your boarding teams are trapped or delayed throughout the ship. And you personally are now aboard a vessel that you can't easily leave if things go badly. Is that supposed to frighten me? Skarmaw asked, but Ember detected a slight edge in his voice. Not frighten, inform. You have two choices, Skarmaw. You can continue your assault and maybe capture a few dozen refugees before the warships arrive. Or you can accept my offer and leave this system with your reputation intact. And what exactly are you offering? Ember smiled, even though she knew he couldn't see her. Information about human defensive capabilities that will save you from making this mistake again. In exchange, you withdraw your forces and leave the refugees alone. There was a long pause before Skarmaw responded. You think knowledge about human tactics is worth 3,000 prisoners. I think knowledge about why 3 elite pirate teams couldn't defeat a ship full of civilian refugees might be valuable to someone in your profession, Ember replied. Especially since this isn't the last time you'll encounter humans. Through the ship's sensors, she could see Skarmaw considering her words. The pirate leader was many things, but he wasn't stupid. His reputation was built on successful operations, not Pyrrhic victories. Very well, human, he said finally. Explain to me how civilians managed to trap my best teams. Because your team's expected to hunt prey, Ember said. But humans aren't prey animals, Skarmaw. We're persistence predators. We don't run from threats. We analyze them, adapt to them, and turn them against themselves. She activated her personal display, showing the ship's schematic to the corridor sensors. Your teams are trapped not because we overpowered them, but because we convinced the ship's own safety systems to contain them. Every blast door they tried to breach, every environmental control they triggered, every security protocol they activated, we turned it all into part of our defense. Skarmaw was quiet for a moment. Clever, but ultimately futile. I'm not trapped by safety protocols. No, Ember agreed. But you're trapped by something else, economics. Explain. This operation has already taken longer and cost more resources than any successful raid should. Your teams are pinned down, your schedule is compromised, and military intervention is incoming. Even if you kill everyone aboard this ship, you'll lose money on the operation. She paused, letting that sink in. But more importantly, word will spread about what happened here. Other potential targets will know that civilian transports can organize effective resistance. Your intimidation tactics will lose their effectiveness. Through the sensors, Ember could see Skarmaw's posture changing. The confident predator was beginning to think like a businessman. And if I withdraw, he asked, you tell everyone that the transport was defended by Galactic Council Special Forces, Ember said. Your reputation remains intact, and other civilian targets won't try to copy our defensive strategies because they'll think they need military training to make them work. It was a lie, of course. The refugees had organized their resistance using nothing but determination and the ship's existing systems. But it was a lie that served everyone's interests. An elegant solution, Skarmaw admitted. But what guarantee do I have that you'll honor this agreement? The same guarantee you give to any business partner, Ember replied. Mutual benefit. You want to preserve your reputation and operational effectiveness. I want these refugees to live. Both outcomes are possible if you withdraw now. Another long pause. Through her communicator, Ember could hear urgent reports from around the ship as the remaining pirate teams continued their struggles with defensive systems. Finally, Scarmoss spoke. Dr. Thorne, you have impressed me. It has been many years since anyone surprised me with their tactical thinking. Does that mean we have an agreement? It means you have taught me something valuable about humans, the pirate leader replied. Your species is indeed weak and poorly armed, but you are not prey animals. A new sound echoed through the ship's corridors, the distinctive whine of teleportation devices activating. One by one, the pirate teams were being extracted from their positions throughout the ship. All teams return to ships immediately. Scarmaw's voice commanded over the pirate communication frequencies. Operation is concluded. Within minutes, the ship's sensors showed the 3 raider vessels moving away from the Harmony. They maintained combat formation until they reached the system's edge, then jumped to hyperspace just as the first Galactic Council warship emerged from its own hyperspace jump. On the refugee transport, 3,000 beings emerged from their shelters to find themselves alive and unharmed. The corridors filled with celebration, relief, and amazement as families reunited and crew members began assessing the ship's condition. Captain Yelnatha's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. All refugees, this is your captain. The pirate threat has been neutralized. Galactic Council vessels are moving to escort us to our destination. We owe our lives to the courage and determination of everyone who participated in our defense. But in the ship's auxiliary command center, Ember sat quietly at her console, monitoring the communication traffic as the Meridian and 2 other Council ships moved to take protective positions around the transport. Dr. Thorne, came Captain Mordunn's voice over the communication system. This is the Meridian. Please respond. I'm here, Captain, she replied. Are you injured? Do you require medical assistance? Ember looked around at the command center, where she had coordinated the defense of 3,000 refugees against the galaxy's most notorious pirates. Her clothes were torn from crawling through maintenance shafts, her hands were cut from working with ship systems, and she was exhausted to the bone. No medical assistance required, Captain, but I do have something to report. Go ahead, Doctor. Ember smiled as she thought about the conversations she had endured about human limitations and weaknesses. Captain, I believe the crew's assessment of human capabilities may need some revision. There was a long pause before Commander Zethkar's voice came over the communication system. Dr. Thorne, did you just convince the most feared pirate in the galaxy to abandon a successful boarding operation? Actually, Commander, I convinced him that humans are persistence predators rather than prey animals. The rest followed, naturally. Another pause, this one even longer. Dr. Thorne, came Dr. Yila's voice, filled with something that sounded like awe. Remind me never to underestimate your species again. As a Meridian prepared to escort the refugee transport to its destination, Ember finally allowed herself to relax. The galaxy's most feared pirates had learned something important about humanity today, and word would spread. But more importantly, 3,000 innocent beings would see their new homes, and their children would grow up free. And in the end, that was what humans did. They turned impossible situations into victories, not through superior strength or technology, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. 6 hours later, aboard the Meridian, Ember sat in the observation deck where the conversation about human capabilities had begun. The alien crew members who had dismissed her species as primitive and weak now looked at her with something approaching respect. Dr. Thorne, said Commander Zethkar, I believe I owe you an apology. We clearly misunderstood something fundamental about human nature. No apology needed, Commander, Ember replied. You weren't wrong about our physical limitations. We really are weak, fragile, and poorly adapted for direct combat. Then, how did you accomplish what 3,000 refugees and experienced pirates would consider impossible? Ember looked out at the stars streaming past the viewport, thinking about the question carefully. Because sometimes, Commander, the most dangerous predator in the galaxy isn't the one with the biggest claws or the strongest armor. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to accept that it's supposed to be prey. The alien officers exchanged glances, processing the implications of her words. "Is that why humans are called persistence predators?" asked Dr. Yila. "Partly," Ember said, "but mostly it's because when everything seems hopeless, when logic says we should surrender, when any reasonable species would give up, that's exactly when humans become most creative." She stood up, preparing to return to her quarters and write her official report on the incident. Dr. Thorne called Lieutenant Vexare. "One more question. What would have happened if Skarma hadn't accepted your deal?" Ember paused at the doorway, considering the question. "Then, we would have found another way to protect those refugees. That's what humans do, Lieutenant. We don't know how to give up." As she walked through the corridors of the Meridian, Ember reflected on the day's events. The galaxy was a vast, dangerous place filled with species that were stronger, faster, and better armed than humans. But she suspected that after today, word would begin to spread about the small, weak species that turned ships into fortresses, civilians into defenders, and impossible situations into victories. And perhaps other predators would think twice before targeting what they assumed was helpless prey. Because the galaxy had just learned something important about humanity, they weren't just another species trying to survive among the stars. They were the species that taught others how to survive the impossible.